Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ryan Hall. I am the Director of Marketing for Lighthouse AI, a pharma solutions company. We welcome you to today's webinar, State Licensing 101 for the Pharmaceutical Professional. Before we dive into the main content, we'd like to provide you with some additional information to ensure that you have a smooth and enjoyable webinar experience. First, the webinar is being recorded and will be sent via email to all attendees within 24 hours after today's webinar. By default, all attendees' audio and video are muted to minimize background noise and distractions. The chat function will also be disabled for today's webinar. However, you can submit your questions anytime with the QA button at the bottom of your Zoom window. We'll answer those at the end of today's session. Now, I'd like to introduce today's speakers. Shanti Hinsberg is a Senior Research Associate with Lighthouse AI. She has over 20 years of experience in the pharmaceutical, pharmacy, and healthcare industries in both paralegal and regulatory compliance roles. Also on today's webinar is Sandy Carter. Sandy is also a Senior Research Associate with Lighthouse AI and has over 10 years of experience in the pharmaceutical life sciences, specializing in high-quality compliance research across manufacturers, wholesalers, and 3PLs. Very quick legal disclaimer before we get started. First and foremost, Lighthouse AI is not a law firm and does not provide legal advice. The information provided is subject to change and is only intended for the use as informative industry knowledge. Now, let's take a quick look at today's agenda. Today, we'll be covering the basics of state licensing, an overview of licensing by business model, the challenges of state licensing, a survey of states, including their costs, difficulty, and timelines, and also the consequences of noncompliance. Now that we've covered today's agenda, let's get started. I'd like to hand over to Sandy, who will start us off by covering the basics of state licensing. Sandy, over to you.
Thanks so much, Ryan. State licensing and state licensing changes start with legislation, which is created and passed by state's legislator. Once the law is enacted, the agency develops detailed rules and regulations to implement the law's intent. These rules outline specific requirements for licensing. Once adopted, these rules carry the force of the law. The regulatory agency then enforces these rules through licensing processes, routine inspections, and investigations. Some state licensing and regulatory entities are housed within agencies like the Department of Health, Consumer Protection, and professional licensing. Often these agencies have regulatory boards. The most common state licensing regulatory board is the State Board of Pharmacy. Today, the pharma supply chain consists of manufacturing, distribution, and 3PL services. Some or all may fall under the same regulatory framework as pharmacy, or they may fall under a different agency. For example, Louisiana has the Louisiana Board of Drug and Device Distributors, but pharmacy is regulated by the Louisiana Board of Pharmacy. Making matters more complicated is some states have yet another agency that regulates controlled substances or licensing for devices. These agencies issue the licenses for facilities in the pharmaceutical supply chain. Agencies issue licenses at the facility level, not the company level, because different locations equal different risks, equal different individual regulation. And these agencies issue both home state licenses and non-resident licenses. A state agency will issue a home state license to facilities physically located within the state. The same agency issues the non-resident licenses to facilities physically located outside of the state. Let's talk about home state licensing first. A facility must obtain a home state license in the state for which the facility is physically located for two main reasons. First, the home state requires the facility to hold a license. Second, non-resident states require facilities to hold licenses in their home state in order to obtain a non-resident license. The first of those two reasons is easy to explain. Agencies require most facilities in the state to hold a license. Now, I said most facilities instead of all facilities because some states don't license all business models, meaning that some facilities in the pharmaceutical supply chain do not need to hold a license in their home state. However, when the home state does not license When the home state does not license a home state license for a facility, that creates problems for the facility when they're trying to obtain licenses in non-resident states. Because as I said, the second reason facilities must obtain a home state license is that non-resident states require facilities to hold licenses in their home state. In this case, the facility must obtain an exemption letter from the home state to provide to the non-resident states when applying for non-resident licenses. Most states will provide an exemption letter, but if your home state won't provide an exemption letter, you can try to provide the non-resident state your home state residence regulatory language that indicates that your home state does not require a license at your facility. That's what would be covered in the exemption letter provided to the home state anyhow. Now, with that being said, you still may face complications with agencies in other states, even with an exemption letter. For example, in New York, they will not license facilities without a home state license, even with an exemption letter. Now, one more note about home state licenses: a home state will conduct an inspection of the facility as part of the license application process. To prepare for the inspection, make sure you thoroughly review the inspection or self-inspection forms posted on your home state's website. Use these forms to guide your facility setup. The inspector will very likely use the same form when conducting your facility inspection. And be sure to look in the regulations to see if there's any other specific criteria for your facility type, such as square footage. Okay, so that's the 101 on home state licenses. Now let's talk about non-resident licenses. In addition to your home state license, you'll need a non-resident license in some states in which your products are sold or shipped. Some states require manufacturers with their name on the label to hold a license in their state, even if the product simply ends up in the state, meaning the facility still requires a license even if the facility did not directly sell or ship the product into the state. When applying for licenses in non-resident states, many non-resident agencies must verify your existing licensure as part of the process for your application, including your home state license and non-resident licenses. Non-resident agencies verify licenses in two ways. First, some agencies rely upon the license lookup on another agency's website. And then second, some agencies will require you to obtain a certified license verification from the agency that issued your existing license. You'll want to request these license certifications early because agencies take some time to provide these certifications. As part of the application process, some states require background checks for owners, officers, and designated representatives, or the pharmacist in charge. Some states require federal background checks, but others mandate state-level checks, and in some states, they'll require both federal and state background check. Background checks can vary in two ways: the type of criminal history reviewed and the time period considered. Some states specify that the type of criminal history that must be reported. This typically includes offenses related to possession, control, or wholesale distribution of prescription drugs, or any involvement, direct or investment, in businesses that manufacture, administer, prescribe, distribute, or store prescription drugs. Time period. Some states do differ on how far back the records must go. For example, Wyoming requires reporting for the last 7 years, while Utah requires the past 10 years. All right, I've covered license verification and background checks. Next, let's talk about ancillary requirements. Specifically, let's talk about surety bonds, reporting requirements, foreign qualifications, and registered agents. Surety bonds are required as a prerequisite for facility licenses in about 13 states. They guarantee that a state agency can collect monetary compensation if necessary. The cost is typically 1% of the value of the bond per year. For example, a $100,000 bond will net a $1,000 per year fee. Another ancillary requirement is federal reporting. Having a state license means you also have to comply with federal reporting requirements. For example, distributors, 3PLs, have to report annually to the FDA. A more universal requirement in many states is foreign qualification. A foreign qualification is a registry with the entity you're applying for licensure, Secretary of State. In most states, you must also have a registered agent for your foreign qualification. At least 26 states require a registered agent in their state as a prerequisite for licensure. All right, that covers ancillary requirements for non-resident licenses. Let's talk about personal licenses, including designated representatives and pharmacists in charge. Manufacturers, wholesalers, and 3PLs must assign a designated representative or manager on almost all license applications. The designated representative, or DR, serves as the company primary contact for regulatory, licensing, and compliance matters. The DR ensures that facility operations comply with federal, state, and local regulations, maintains accurate licensing records, and communicates with the regulatory agency. Some states have an education requirement for the DR and want the applicant to submit transcripts indicating a high school diploma was completed or proof of a GED, in addition to the work experience. DRs require their own personal license in Alabama, California, and Florida for prescription drug wholesalers, and Idaho has a formal license requirement. To obtain a DR license in California, a DR must first complete a California online training program. And to obtain a DR license in Florida, DRs must pass an in-person test, which consists of questions that pertain to Florida regulations of wholesale distribution. So that applies to DRs. Now let's talk about pharmacists in charge, or PICs. There are currently 18 states that require the PIC of a non-resident pharmacy to be licensed in their home state. 2 states require registration, Idaho and Iowa. Beginning July 1st, 2026, California will require a non-resident pharmacy's PIC to be licensed in the state as well. All right, that covers the basics of licensing, including home state licenses, non-resident licenses, personnel licenses, and ancillaries such as background checks, foreign qualifications, registered agents, and surety bonds. I'll pass it over to Ryan for a quick poll question.
Thank you, Sandy. All right, everyone, we're going to stop at intermediate points of the webinar to do a little engagement and have some poll questions. I'm curious today of how many people on our webinar are brand new to state licensing and how many people may consider themselves state licensing experts. So I'm going to put a poll up on the screen now. Love to gather a little bit of audience data and share that with everybody. It always makes each webinar a little unique and always kind of interesting to see who's joining us today. So polls up on your screen now. If you could answer that, looks like answers are flowing in. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and close that poll. Great. All right. The results should be up on the screen now if you can see this. It looks like we have some beginners, some experts, but most people with no experience or experts, and then beginners to intermediates are the majority of the webinar today. Thank you for participating, everybody. Appreciate you sharing that information. Perfect. All right, great. All right, we're going to move on to the next session, and we're going to talk about business models. And I'm going to hand things over to Shanti now. Thank you, Shanti.
Thanks, Ryan. So I'd like to address several common business models and the different compliance challenges they present. One of the most important and frequently misunderstood factors in determining the appropriate model is the difference between ownership and possession. This is essential to how state boards assess licensing obligations and serves as a fundamental building block for understanding state-level licensing requirements. For example, a 3PL possesses a product without ownership, or has possession of a product without ownership, while a virtual manufacturer or wholesaler owns the product but never takes physical possession. Then you have a traditional wholesaler that has both possession and ownership. Many of these states base licensing requirements on this distribution. Understanding who owns the product when it enters a state versus who physically ships it is often the determining factor in whether a license is required or an exemption applies. Another important consideration is whether entities supporting your virtual model are licensed in the applicable state. In some cases, a trading partner licensing can eliminate the need for your own license. So example, in Kentucky, a non-resident virtual manufacturer does not need a license if its 3PL is licensed to ship in that state. However, the resident entity would still be required to obtain a license. These examples highlight the types of nuances that commonly affect licensing requirements or exemptions. Whether an entity touches, ships, or owns a product, it will play a significant role that is directly tied to the business model. In the end, licensing decisions come down to the actual business activities performed and the products that are involved. So let's take a look at manufacturers. Manufacturers can carry additional regulatory compliance obligations. This can include an FDA registration. Many state boards require confirmation of an FDA registration before granting a license. As a result, traditional manufacturers often enter the state licensing process with a fundamental requirement already met, which can make state licensing less burdensome compared to other business models. So while other manufacturers may face fewer barriers to initial state licensing, they are often burdened with additional ongoing obligations. These can include federal reporting requirements, state drug price transparency reporting, opioid tax reporting, a sales representative reporting, and participation in drug take-back programs. Also, during an FDA inspection, the agency may issue a Form 483 to document observations that must be corrected. These findings can be extended beyond the FDA. A state licensing agency may also review or act on 483 observations when they're evaluating a license or for compliance. A state approach to a manufacturer license can vary significantly. Let's take California, for example. A non-resident manufacturer is exempt from licensing if it only distributes products it physically manufactures and has an FDA registration. Then on the other hand, you have virtual manufacturers typically fall out of this exemption, which creates uncertainty. Recently, Pennsylvania has taken a more comprehensive approach by licensing in-state virtual manufacturers. This provides a substantial benefit to virtual entities domiciled in Pennsylvania because it allows them to obtain a home state license. As of April 13, 2025, Pennsylvania in-state virtual manufacturers that hold an FDA-approved commercial product are required to be licensed. For Pennsylvania-based virtuals, this was a major shift because it finally allows them to obtain a home state license, which they can use to pursue non-resident licensing in states like New York that require a true reciprocal home state license. Now, wholesale distributors. In most cases, wholesale distributors need resident licenses in every state they distribute into, with a few exceptions like Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, and Hawaii. And even in those cases, you still have to meet certain conditions. For instance, in Pennsylvania, a non-resident wholesaler must be licensed if they have sales reps physically in the state. This is what Pennsylvania typically refers to as boots on the ground. Or if a wholesaler distributes a List 1 chemical, such as pseudoephedrine, into Pennsylvania, a license is required. More broadly, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, and Hawaii are really the only states that offer limited exemptions for wholesalers. And those exemptions depend heavily on the business model. Because wholesalers sit at the center of the supply chain, they're highly exposed to regulatory enforcement. So when shipping products into a state without proper licensing, that can result in significant fines and penalties. As best practice, wholesalers should maintain licensing in all applicable states and jurisdictions whenever possible. Then you have some state regulations that allow agencies to impose fines on per item per day basis, which can quickly result in penalties totaling thousands of dollars. For instance, Alabama. Alabama has authorized civil penalties up to $4,000 per violation. So now let's look at virtual manufacturers and wholesalers. These business models are more complex than traditional ones because states interpret ownership, possession, and distribution differently. There are currently 39 states that license virtual manufacturers with the addition of Pennsylvania, and then there are 40 states that license virtual wholesalers. So in some cases, a home state may not issue a license for a particular business model. There are some states that require you to provide the license number of your CMO or 3PL as part of the licensing application. If that trading partner isn't properly licensed in that state, you may have to stop shipping or find a new licensed vendor, which can pose a roadblock for virtual entities. That's where the title model comes in. It's commonly used by virtual entities because it allows for a faster path to market. It does introduce some regulatory complications. So in some states, it's about who's on the label, even if they're not the seller or selling, while other states focus on who's actually selling the product. Another hurdle for virtual entities is when a state licenses the activity but doesn't distinguish between the virtual or physical operations. So for instance, in New Jersey, the definition of a wholesale distributor is pretty broad there. So for instance, in summation, if drugs are stored, warehoused, handled, or held, and offered or marketed, a facility can be considered a wholesaler. This is vague and it opens up to interpretation. Finally, virtual entities need to consider state licensing timelines, potential roadblocks that could be tied to prerequisites or documentation, and whether inspection requirements differ for virtual operations. Now let's move on to third-party logistic providers, or 3PLs. Wholesalers and 3PLs operate under distinct business models. Wholesalers take ownership of products, while 3PLs never take ownership or title. When those rules overlap, such as 3PLs engaging in wholesale activities or wholesalers engaging in 3PL services, states will require two separate licenses to cover each activity. There are still a handful of states that license 3PLs as wholesalers, but that landscape is expected to evolve as DSCSA requirements are fully implemented. In the future, we may see either clear exemptions or entirely new licensing structures for 3PLs. So from an operational standpoint, 3PLs are a critical link in the supply chain, especially for virtual entities. Regardless of whether a virtual company uses a title model or sells directly into a state, the 3PL is the party physically distributing the product. With that overview of various business models, I'll turn it back over to Sandy to walk through the state licensing challenges.
Thanks, Shanti. The state licensing information you need to obtain and maintain compliance is scattered, inconsistent, ambiguous, incomplete, obscured, and constantly changing. And that's why state licensing is so challenging. Here's what I mean. By scattered, I mean that the state licensing information you need is scattered across over 80 agency websites, across multiple web pages and documents and those sites, and even scattered across statutes and rules. By inconsistent, I mean definitions, rules, requirements, and even the list of controlled substances differ from agency to agency. And while there's a lot that is similar, there's a lot that is different from agency to agency, both within the same state and across different states. By ambiguous, I mean that the information is unclear and therefore inconclusive. For example, fundamental words such as distribute and drug can mean many different things. And they don't mean many different things across different agencies and states. Yet those words are clearly defined or scoped by each agency. By incomplete, I mean critical information doesn't exist anywhere in writing, forcing you to call to get clarification. Clarification that agencies can't provide many times. By obscured, I mean information you need that is often buried in longer documents, especially statutes and rules, ranging from documents with 500 words to documents with 500 pages. And yes, all information you need to manage your state licensing, which is something like 15,000 data points, is constantly changing. And while you may be compliant today, something could change tomorrow that will make you non-compliant. Now, I point this out because 6 root causes create incomplete, incorrect, and late state licensing. Here's what I mean by incomplete. The average facility is non-compliant in multiple states because the facility does not comply with state licensing requirements. More specifically, I mean facilities don't hold all the licenses a facility must hold. They don't renew licenses when they need to renew, and facilities don't change licenses when they must change. Facilities do not obtain licenses they should obtain because of many reasons. Here's a few of those reasons. State licensing professionals may believe their product is not subject to state licensing. I just heard another example of this last week. State licensing professionals may not even know about a licensing agency in one or more jurisdictions. For example, I recently talked to a state licensing veteran who didn't know there was a separate agency for devices in one of the jurisdictions the company was doing business in. State licensing professionals may not realize that a state that previously did not license their business model now does license their business model. State licensing professionals may incorrectly believe a Class 3 license also covers Class 1 products in a specific state. Why is it so easy to hold licenses you must hold? Because the information that you need to determine whether you must hold a license is scattered, inconsistent, ambiguous, incomplete, obscured, and constantly changing. And that's why it's easy not to change licenses you must change. As in the case of change of ownership, officer, address, name, designated representative, and so on. Common reasons for non-compliance with change requirements include state licensing professionals don't even know that the specific company change required a formal notification with the licensing agency. No one knew about the change or told the state licensing professional about the change because they didn't know the change affected their licensing. The same change can have different change requirements for the same license for the same agency. For example, a change of ownership could require license holders to send an email to the agency, submit a change application, or obtain a whole new license altogether. The difference depends on the amount of ownership that is changing or other factors. Why is it so easy to make this mistake? Because the information you need to determine the change requirements is scattered, inconsistent, ambiguous, incomplete, obscured, and constantly changing. And that's why facilities are non-compliant due to incomplete compliance. Now let's talk about non-compliance due to fulfilling requirements incorrectly. By incorrectly, I mean that state licensing professionals submit applications correctly, resulting in deficiencies that delay obtaining, renewing, and changing licenses. Again, the reason many state licensing professionals submit applications incorrectly is because critical information that guides the application submission is scattered, inconsistent, ambiguous, incomplete, obscured, and constantly changing. And those root causes apply external regulatory information, but also to your internal information. There are many ways to submit applications incorrectly, such as incomplete answered questions, a missing attachment, an outdated attachment, incomplete list of disciplinary actions, incorrect facility diagram, missing fingerprint cards, outdated fingerprint cards. The list goes on and on. This is a short summary of how one can complete state licensing requirements incorrectly. Last but not least, I'll touch on completing state licensing requirements late. I don't have the time to go into this level of detail. The same six root causes that we just discussed also cause state licensing professionals to miss deadlines for renewals. That covers what I wanted to talk. That covers what I wanted to cover as it regards to the biggest challenges in state licensing. Challenges that result in incomplete, incorrect, and late state licensing because critical state licensing information, internal and external information, is scattered, inconsistent, ambiguous, incomplete, obscured, and constantly changing. I'll now hand it over to Ryan for another poll question.
Great. Thank you, Sandy. All right, everyone. Now that we talked about the challenges of state licensing, we're curious if there are any particular areas of state licensing that you find the most challenging and what you may outsource to third-party vendors. So I'm going to put a new poll on the screen. And if you find any of these sections particularly challenging, we'd love to know and share it with the audience. Do you find new license applications the most challenging? Managing your renewals once you obtain the license? Submitting change applications for change of ownership, change of address, change of designated rep, and so on. Assessments for your licensing needs, which is a gap assessment. Change assessments, what requirements are you held to once you do have a change, or simply staying up to date with new and changing regulations or monitoring those changes. So I'm going to leave this poll up on the screen for just a moment longer. See a lot of results coming in and interesting data. I'm going to show you that in just a moment. So thank you so much for your participation, everyone. All right, let's go ahead and close that poll and share those results. All right. Not surprising. People find challenging monitoring new and changing regulations. I think we all struggle with that. Following all 50 states, the additional jurisdictions, all licensing requirement changes, and staying up to date with all that is very cumbersome. And I think most people on this call spent a lot of time trying to stay up to date with that. So um, everything else is pretty evenly split between obtaining new licenses, renewing your licenses, and so on. But just staying on top of all the changes is by far the clear winner there. So thanks again for your participation, everyone there. I'm going to hand things back over to Shanti now to talk about state licensing timelines.
Thanks, Ryan. Next, we'll walk through three quick state level overviews, excuse me. There are three main factors that tend to impact licensing: how long it takes to process an application, the cost of the licensing application, and the difficulty of meeting state-specific requirements. The difficulty often arises from prerequisites such as achieving an accreditation, such as the NABP drug distributor accreditation, or challenges related to a qualified licensed DR, especially in states like California, Florida, and Alabama. As far as timeframes go, most licensing applications take about 3 to 4 months from submission to approval. But certain jurisdictions consistently experience longer processing times, such as California, Washington, D.C., and Florida. Then on the other hand, you have states like Arkansas, Connecticut, and West Virginia that tend to have faster processing times. So what's the difficulty? What makes states so more difficult? It's the scope and the complexity of the requirements and the level of details that needed to meet them. Obtaining accurate and complete information from the right internal stakeholders can be challenging and sometimes consuming for companies. As discussed earlier, licensing requirements can vary by business model and by state. So for example, there are at least 10 states that require controlled substance reporting for certain business models. Then there are manufacturers that are also subject to reporting requirements, such as prescription drug price transparency reporting, and that's in about roughly 22 states. And then that number will grow because more states will begin implementing reporting requirements. And of course, we can't forget those states that are more complex due to the number and scope of their requirements, which again includes your states like California, Florida, Maryland, and Missouri. Some states are considered less stringent in terms of licensing requirements, and those are Arkansas, Connecticut, and West Virginia. Now, costs. The cost of licensing is not consistent across states. On average, the median application fees range from $500 to $750. It's important to note that these figures cover only the licensing application fee itself and does not cover additional expenses such as your fingerprinting or your background checks. So in some states, overall licensing costs can increase with additional fees that are required. And those fees also include controlled substance fees or fees associated with licensing a DR. Some states have relatively lower licensing costs, typically under $750. And those include your states like Arkansas, Hawaii, Indiana, Kansas, and New Jersey. While you have other states that are more costly due to the additional fees, with common examples being Alabama, Florida, Minnesota, and New York. That wraps up the state licensing complexities. With that, I'll hand that back over to Sandy to cover the consequences of non-compliance.
Thanks, Shanti. There are three main consequences of non-compliance. And by non-compliance, I mean a facility does not hold a license it should hold, a facility does not renew a license it should renew, and a facility does not report changes that should report. The different consequences include fines, revenue loss, and reputational damage. Let's start with fines. When an agency disciplines a facility, agencies often issue fines. Not always, but often. The average fine is around $1,000. However, I've seen fines much higher than $1,000. For example, Arkansas has fined $10,000 for a late notification of a change of ownership. Some agencies impose significant penalties. These fines are calculated based on each individual item shipped into the state and accumulate daily. This can quickly lead to penalties that far exceed $10,000. The amount of the fine represents one aspect of how responsive or impactful consequences can be. The other dimension is what is known as domino discipline. And here's what I mean by domino discipline. If one agency disciplines your facility, you most often have to report that discipline to the other agencies where the facility holds licenses. One or more of those agencies may discipline your facility because of your non-compliance that led to the discipline in another state, meaning instead of one fine, you'll receive multiple fines. That's domino discipline. While fines can add up quickly, they don't add up as fast as lost revenue, which is what I want to talk about next. Lost sales revenue can quickly total $250,000 in one state due to one instance of non-compliance. Therefore, lost sales revenue is a problem that is literally 250 times greater than fines. Facilities lose revenue because they must stop selling or shipping into each state in which they are non-compliant. Facilities stop doing business in states they are non-compliant because agencies require facilities to stop doing business when someone discovers the non-compliance. More specifically, facilities voluntarily stop selling and shipping because agency discipline is far worse than non-compliance that is known versus non-compliance that is unknown. Here's how non-compliance can total to up to over $250,000 really quick. According to our market research, the typical facility with $75 million of annual revenue will lose $283,000 of revenue each year over the next 5 years due to non-compliance with state licensing requirements. And that's because why? That's because there's 3 requirement types. The first is requirement to obtain licenses. The second is requirement to renew licenses, and the third requirement is to change licenses. A 50-state facility that is non-compliant in just 10% of each requirement type is non-compliant in 15 states. That's because non-compliance is cumulative, meaning that the facility is non-compliant in 30% of states in which it conducts business. To be clear, the 30% non-compliance is almost all unknown because the state licensing is so complicated, because critical state licensing information is so scattered, inconsistent, ambiguous, incomplete, obscured, and constantly changing. Regardless, a facility that is 30% non-compliant across 50 states is non-compliant in 15 states. And if 20% of the total non-compliance is caught, that means the facility will temporarily lose revenue in 3 states over the next 5 years. And that equates to $280,000 per year, assuming it takes the average 3 months to correct the non-compliance when it's caught. And that's why lost revenue is a significant consequence of non-compliance. The third and final consequence I'll point to is reputational damage. Non-compliance damages your reputation with customers and licensing agencies. By customers, I mean both your patients and your trading partners. Nowadays, when a patient is interested in a product, they'll look it up on the internet. And you don't want a potential client's first interaction with your company to be a scathing review of how your specialty pharmacy failed to ship their prescription, all because your pharmacy license expired. Here's what I mean by reputational damage and with trading partners. In addition to receiving disciplinary action and fines from state boards, your company will have the discipline attached to its license with the state board that issued it. With the exception of letters of concerns or warnings, discipline is generally public information and is also listed on the state's websites for the public to view, including current and potential trading partners. And some agencies post discipline on their website for 10 years, like Utah. Beyond the website, some agencies choose to place the discipline on their state's quarterly newsletter. Beyond discipline, trading partners will definitely hold it against you if you cannot ship their orders because you were non-compliant with the state's licensing requirements, especially if your customers found the non-compliance themselves. We have customers that come to us ready to do whatever it takes to get their state licensing in order because they just lost their customer due to non-compliance. And that's what I mean by reputational damage with trading partners. Finally, non-compliance damages your reputation with state agencies. Applications ask, has your facility had disciplinary action taken against it or has a license ever been denied? And if you have, you'll have to answer yes and provide copies of all the disciplinary action from each state that disciplined your company. And that's how non-compliance damages your reputation with customers and licensing agencies.
Great. All right. Thank you, Shanti and Sandy, for all that incredibly helpful information. What we'd like to do now is show you the Lighthouse AI state licensing software and how it helps you solve many of the challenges that we reviewed today. I'm going to invite my colleague Tessa to join us now. Tessa is on our state licensing software team as a training specialist, and she's been with the company since 2025. She's a seasoned learning and development professional with 8 years of experience with training design and facilitation. Okay, I'm going to hand things over to Tessa now for a brief demo.
Thanks, Ryan. Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with you today. As we learned from our webinar, state licensing information is spread across more than 80 agencies, and the details that you need are often buried in scattered web pages and documents. Much of what's available is incomplete, unclear, or mixed in with information that doesn't apply to you, making all of this very difficult to determine your true licensing requirements. That's exactly why we built Lighthouse AI, to solve the problems that cause most facilities to be non-compliant with so many state licensing requirements. Lighthouse AI helps you to exponentially reduce your financial risk of noncompliance with state licensing requirements by enabling you to discover overlooked requirements, reduce avoidable deficiencies, and eliminate lost and forgotten tasks. So, how does the software deliver each of those three benefits? Let's start with discovering overlooked state licensing requirements. Companies overlook state licensing requirements for two main reasons. First, they incorrectly capture facility attributes. And second, they incorrectly determine license requirements. Our software solves those problems that create both of the challenges. When we say facility attributes, we're referring to a facility's business model, its product types, and the jurisdictions in which those products are sold, shipped, or simply end up. State licensing professionals must correctly and completely define facility attributes because these attributes determine which state licenses each facility must obtain for each agency in each jurisdiction. Yet most capture a large portion of those attributes incorrectly, resulting in misidentifying their license requirements. The Lighthouse AI Facility Assessment Questionnaire solves this problem. Once the questionnaire is complete, our software automatically runs an assessment. That assessment is looking for matches between your facility attributes and the over 700 state licenses cataloged inside the software. By matches, we mean licenses that you must hold because of your facility's business model, products, and the jurisdictions into which you sell or ship those products. The software lists each required license and provides critical information about each license in each column. These assessments eliminate the problems that cause state licensing personnel to incorrectly determine many of their license requirements. And because licensing requirements change each year across all agencies in all jurisdictions, our research team and AI tools continuously crawl agency websites, applications, state and federal legislation, state agency guidance documents, and agency FAQs. Our research team and technology immediately update the backend of Lighthouse AI to reflect the changes that they find. Then, the software continuously reruns the assessment, looking for matches between all of your facility attributes and any new or newly required licenses that may have popped up. And while I don't have time to show you this today, please know that our subscriptions also include change assessments. The software automatically determines the change requirements for all of your active licenses affected by a reportable change, such as a change of ownership, address, officer, designated representative, and so on. Not only does the software help you discover overlooked requirements, it also helps you to reduce avoidable deficiencies. Unlike agency websites, our software compiles application details that are clear and complete for each license and are not obscured by the majority of information that isn't even relevant to you. We compile the application name, its definition, notes, processing time, renewal term, application type, forms, citations, fees, attachments, and prerequisites. So now that we've covered how our software helps you to reduce avoidable deficiencies and discover overlooked requirements, let's look at how our software helps you to eliminate lost and forgotten tasks. Every row you see in the management module corresponds to a license, including those you already hold, those you are applying for, and those that aren't required. By consolidating all of this assessment data into one place, Lighthouse AI saves you significant time and effort. When you click on one of those licenses, the software organizes your open and completed activities for each license along with their associated tasks. Activities are things like renewals, initials, and reportable changes. The software also includes options for email notifications for new and expiring tasks. This is especially beneficial for those individuals who support your work in state licensing. The management dashboard tracks everything from the license status to upcoming renewals, expiring documents, and open tasks. To summarize, the Lighthouse AI software gives you the tools to reduce your financial risk of state licensing noncompliance by helping you discover overlooked requirements, reduce avoidable deficiencies, and eliminate lost and forgotten tasks. What you saw here today is only a glimpse of the full Lighthouse AI state licensing software. If you would like to explore all the ways that this would benefit your organization, our sales team would be happy to walk you through and help you understand the available services and pricing options.
All right, we made it to the Q&A session. We're going to open things up to the audience. We're going to have Shanti and Sandy answer our questions. Sorry about that, Shanti. We'll take a look at what people submitted. It's not too late to submit your questions now. Again, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your window. Submit your questions there, and we'll take a look and see how much time we have to answer as many of the questions as we can. Shanti and Sandy, are you ready to take some questions from the audience?
Yep.
I'm ready.
Awesome. All right, great. Perfect. Let's take a look. It looks like we have quite a few questions. Sandy, I think I'm going to throw the first one your way. Someone had asked if, what did they say? If I'm a manufacturer, but I also distribute, do I need multiple licenses?
That's actually a really great question because if you mean by distributing your own products, most states will allow you to distribute your own products with the manufacturer license. However, there is, I believe, off the top of my head, I think one state that does require entities to hold both a manufacturer license and a distributor license, even if they're distributing their own product. Also, if you intend to distribute your own products and distribute third-party products, states will require additional licensing for that.
Great. Thanks for taking that one, Sandy. Appreciate the answer. Perfect. Shanti, I'm probably going to throw the next one your way, then we'll do a little round robin, I think.
Okay.
Someone had asked, this is a really good one, and I don't think we covered this earlier. What are the best sources for staying on top of licensing changes? So yeah, we had that poll earlier, and people said they struggle staying on top of all the regulatory changes. So what are the best sources to do that?
Sure. So basically going on the board websites themselves, just, if you continuously go on there. Also, sign up for the board newsletters and mini minutes. They'll send those directly to your email. Some other people also do, they follow the Facebook pages. I've heard other people also doing Google alerts as well. But obviously you can do Lighthouse too, because we'll have all those alerts for you as well, with the selective notifications, and those come up based on your business model. So just whichever you prefer.
Great. Awesome. Thank you, Shanti. I'll take this one real quick. Someone in the audience had just asked if there's going to be a recording of this webinar distributed later. There will be an email coming out tomorrow with a link to the webinar recording. So if you'd like to rewatch it or send it to some colleagues, that will be available. So great. Sandy, I'm going to send the next one your way. We covered the boards of pharmacy earlier, and I think you had talked about some of the other agencies, but someone had asked, what other agencies besides the board of pharmacy do I need to be licensed with?
Well, that will depend on your product and your business activity. So you could be required to be licensed or registered with the FDA, the DEA, and then besides the Board of Pharmacy, there are controlled substance boards, and then there are also boards that also regulate devices. So there are other boards other than the boards of pharmacy where you could be required to hold a license.
Awesome. Thank you, Sandy. Appreciate that. All right, Shanti. Oh, this is a good one. We were talking about virtual manufacturers earlier. Someone had asked, why does my home state require a physical inspection, even though I'm a virtual manufacturer?
Sure. So home states will require a physical inspection because they need to ensure that you are following the regulatory oversight and you're accountable for everything. Not solely in the physical performance, but just the facility activities. It also helps enables the state to verify that you're maintaining a business established place of business. Excuse me. So you're not out of your house or out of your garage. It's an actual business location. And then to ensure that you have adequate controls, documentation, and security if you're having controlled substances. And then if you have the appropriate people, such as your designated representative. And then also home state inspections are also a prerequisite for obtaining a non-resident license in some states. So some states may require that prior to applying, and also it needs to be within a certain amount of months. So not more than, I say, within 2 years. That requires a manufacturer inspection or requires an inspection.
Great. Awesome. Thank you, Shanti. I like these business model specific questions. We've got a few of them, so I'm gonna continue on to the next one I see here. Sandy, I'll throw this one to you. Someone was asking, they are CDMO, and they said, how do I know which state license I should acquire if we're unsure where the product will be distributed by the sponsor? That's a really good question.
Okay, well, obviously you're going to need a license in your home state because that's where you're conducting the CDMO activities. But there are certain states that require a CDMO or a CMO to be licensed regardless if they're directly shipping into the state. Because you're part of the supply chain, they will require you to be licensed even if you are not directly distributing into the state.
Excellent. Awesome. Thank you, Sandy. This is a good one that comes up often too, Shanti, if you don't mind throwing it your way. I saw a couple of questions related to Secretary of State. Someone had simply asked, when do I need to file with the Secretary of State?
So that's good. So typically you would file whenever you're conducting business in that state. And then of course that state will require you to file or be listed as a foreign qualification if it's a non-resident state. And then wherever you're legally doing business too. So you should be able to register in that state. And then you also require doing business as, so your DBAs must be registered as well. And then also just double check with each state's requirements to determine whether you're not required. And then again, our software will also provide that information for you as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Shanti. All right, there are a number of questions left that unfortunately we won't have a chance to get to, but we will follow up with folks after the webinar. I noticed that some of these questions were submitted anonymously, so I won't have your contact information. So what I'd like to ask is, I'm going to put it up on the screen now. If you can email us at the hello@lighthouseai.com email address with those questions we didn't get to. If you submitted anonymously, we will follow up with you and answer those questions. And anyone that submitted their questions with their contact information, I will follow up after the webinar. So I just want to thank everybody for joining today. I hope you enjoyed our State Licensing 101 webinar, and I hope we answer most of your questions. Again, please feel free to reach out to us at hello@lighthouseai.com with any state licensing questions, or just visit our website, lighthouseai.com. Thank you, everybody, for your interest today. We hope to see you next time. Take care.